Hello, this is Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey. Thank you for dropping by for a visit. Today I have a list of 10 things people tell me they are really afraid of, and a few more my friends are afraid of but only talk about after a cup of tea and a chat. Being up here on the roof might tell you that a fear of heights was on the list for some people, but can you guess what else is on the list? Come on, let me tell you what I think. Before we get to that top 10 scary list, thank you for encouraging me to keep making these videos. I'll try. I'm glad you like them. If you're having trouble remembering the titles, you can either search for Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey or just Ian Currey. Don't forget the E in Curry because that unusual spelling really helps a lot with searches. There's a share button down there somewhere too, and that'll allow you to share these videos with your friends. Thanks for doing that. It'll be lovely to meet your friends too. Now, where were we? Oh yes, on the roof, and it's probably a good idea to remember that, isn't it? I'm supposed to be blowing the leaves off the roof before they make a big mess. Being afraid of heights is on our list today, but not number one. What do you think might be in the number one spot? What do you think people are afraid of most? Can you guess? It's creepy crawlies. Did you guess that? Spiders, cockroaches and other bugs are all included. A few weeks ago I was visiting a very good friend of mine who has huge spiders camping around his house. I really don't know what kind of spiders these are, but I'm sure somebody's going to tell me. Hillary says she knows, and she says they are the really scary kind. My dad didn't like spiders at all, but my mum had one as a pet. Well, at least she claimed she did. It would come out of a hiding space whenever the vacuum cleaner came out, and she used to vacuum the hall with a spider riding on the front of the vacuum cleaner. And when she finished, it would go back into hiding. Number two was snakes. I don't think I ever saw a snake as a child except in a zoo. Here in Georgia we have plenty of snakes and have to at least be aware of them. Recently I found a shed snake skin close to our back door. Some friends said that that just means there's a snake lurking somewhere, but so far I've never seen him. Number three is heights. And I've always found this one interesting. Is it really a fear of heights or a fear of falling from a height? I don't know. Maybe both. Of course, blowing leaves off the roof, it's as well, I don't really have a fear of heights. Number four is enclosed spaces. Claustrophobia, it seems, is more common than I thought it would be. When you think about it, some lifts or elevators are quite small and usually we ride those quite happily. But logic and fear don't really go well together, do they? Number five is the dentist. And I've started to realize that a lot of things we fear seem to be much more to do with what's going on in our mind than the reality. Probably a lot of the fear playing out with the dentist is where we play the process over and over in our mind, but once we've actually been to the dentist and our teeth are fixed, there's always a sense of relief even if we don't actually fear the dentist. Now here's something a little unusual. The second half of this list are all things I actually enjoy, but I quite understand that not everyone likes to do the things that I do. Number six is fear of the dark. Now because of my interest in light and night photography, this is something that isn't really scary for me at all. Public speaking is number seven, and right now I'm speaking with just you and through the camera. But if I think about it, there could be a lot of people looking, couldn't there? But they're all friends, so that's quite different. Perhaps this fear may be partly about what people might think if we mess things up. Number 8 is flying. And again, logic isn't the way to appease fear. Telling people it's safer to fly than to drive to the airport really doesn't help at all. I suppose since my job is flying, it's a good thing I'm not afraid of that, isn't it? Although there is one aircraft that for some reason I just don't like. On the flight deck of that plane I can see out, but I can't see the nose of the plane, even if I stand up. And looking out of the window feels like there's nothing in front of me at all. It's really no different than any other aircraft, except I think it must have a slightly different shape. But it feels all wrong, and it feels like I'm about to fall out or something. Number 9, thunder. Weirdly, lightning didn't get mentioned, and the two things always go together. In fact, by the time we hear thunder, the danger is already over, since the lightning always precedes the noise it makes. Growing up, my father, he loved a good thunderstorm just as much as I do, and we'd sit counting seconds between the flash and the bang, and we could work out how far away the storm was. In case you've never done that, count seconds after you see lightning and wait for the bang. It takes between 4 and 5 seconds for the sound to travel about a mile, or 3 seconds for a kilometre. One of my favourite ways to view a storm, though, is from above in an aircraft. Up above, the clouds can be quite spectacular with all that lightning and so on going on below us. Number 10 on the list, dogs. Now, obviously, there are mean and nasty dogs around, but our house just wouldn't be the same without belly rubs, treats and zoomies. I must say I was rather surprised at the list. Not so much because of what was on it, because of what wasn't. I found that fear is a very real thing for a lot of people, but the things that really scare us didn't make the list at all. Fear has a way of growing and entangling our thoughts. It can stop us in our tracks. Fear can consume a person to the point where they just can't function at all. And that must be awful. Some people cope by pretending, and they pretend something isn't real and convincing themselves everything is fine, when of course it really isn't. And once they do that, they sometimes find other people who think the same way, and eventually it becomes really hard to actually deal with the issue because it isn't real anymore. Of course, flying every day, I meet people that are really very anxious, and part of my job is to put them at ease as they travel. One of the things I've found that helps many people is to tell them exactly what's going to happen, but tell them one step at a time. So for example, we're going to pass through some rough air, and so the seatbelt signs will come on. I'll be sitting up front with my seatbelt on too, and it will last for about 5 minutes, and then the sun will shine through the aircraft windows and it'll get a lot calmer. Once we get through that, I'll check in with you. Facing the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, one step at a time, often seems to help. And following life's path is often quite like that too. We really don't know what lays ahead, and being comforted and figuring out just one step at a time can be extremely helpful. Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path." Now a lamp only lights up the path right around where we are, not the whole road all at once. One of my first jobs had a schedule that was all over the place. Some shifts I would get home well after midnight, and on days off I would find it hard to sleep at the proper time, and so I would be wide awake long into the night. I've never liked laying in bed not being able to sleep, so I'd go walking along the coast in the dead of night. If I got home too late, my parents would sometimes be waiting and say things like, "Where have you been? We've been worried sick about you." And the irony wasn't lost on me either. Some of those late shifts were working in a much more dangerous area as a policeman, and I could never work out why it was more important to worry when I walked along the coast than when I was working late at night in a dangerous port area. But worry and fear are completely immune to logic, aren't they? My mum was worried, and while I was enjoying my walk, Mum was spending time thinking of all the various things that could possibly have happened to me. Another real fear is the loss of love. Now, we all love to be loved, and actually most of us choose to love others too. And we all know the pain losing that kind of love can cause. And many are afraid of that. This kind of unconsolable problem may very well come along, but of course God has a way of dealing with that too. Things we are just useless at fixing are His speciality. In Psalm 147 we can read, "He heals the broken-hearted and bandages their wounds." And that's something, of course, as humans we can't possibly do. A fear many of us have had recently in the airline industry is the loss of our jobs. So many things are tied up in all of that, aren't they? How we pay our bills or how we provide for our families. It's all tied up in losing our jobs. But Jesus tells us how much detail He is aware of and how concerned He is for us, even with things like that. And we find in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus asks, "What's the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing. So, don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows." These fears are much more drastic to some of us than a visit to the dentist, aren't they? Here's another one. Fear of embarrassment, of being made fun of. We're all capable of doing silly things once in a while. Oh, me perhaps more than most. But not being able to live something down, as we often put it, can be very hard for some people to live with. What will people think? My whole reputation is at risk. What will I do? I love how so much of what we're concerned about, Jesus has already been through. Imagine being the King of Kings and Creator of the universe and then having this written about you. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to His own advantage. Rather, He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. And the final fear that many people have is fear of death or disease. Now, fear should not control us, and fear obviously is very complicated. But what is the opposite of fear? It isn't foolish action or ignorance. And so often to combat fear, the choice made is, well, I can't control it, so I'm just going to pretend it isn't real and live however I want to. I'm not going to be afraid. Well, that's not the answer, is it? Logic and fear don't go well together, and neither, it seems, do logic and foolishness. While it's true that almost all fear is in our heads, and made worse by letting it eat us up and consume us and control us, it's also true that saying, "I'm not afraid of heights," and walking too close to the edge of the roof is also rather foolish, isn't it? Fear has a very real conqueror, but it isn't foolhardy behavior. No, fear's worst enemy is faith. Last time we talked about shadows, and if you haven't seen that video yet, I encourage you to check it out. Looking at shadows, we saw the way Psalm 23 describes the valley of the shadow of death and how Jesus says, "I am with you." Faith then enables us to put our trust in someone bigger than us, who can control things we can't. At the same time, saying we have faith is not an excuse to ignore obvious danger. There was a silly song we used to sing with the boys long, long ago that had the line, "God is bigger than the boogeyman." And somehow, even today, that earworm clicks in and I find myself singing the song. The song used to work with the boys when they were afraid. Logic was set aside. I didn't try to prove the boogeyman wasn't all the things a small child feared he was, or that we shouldn't be afraid of the boogeyman, or even that the boogeyman wasn't real. Instead, the theme was God is bigger than the boogeyman, and no matter what the boogeyman is. Before you remind me the boogeyman didn't make any of the lists, I'll tell you that the boogeyman is whatever you want it to be on the list, be it flying or feeding your family, spiders or death. God is bigger. The grown-up version with some additional good advice is at the end of the book of Philippians. Don't worry about anything. But instead of stopping there, the writer goes on to tell us what to do instead. Pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds. Fear has a way of compounding itself the more we think about all those bad things we just know are heading our way. But once the writer was finished telling us not to worry about anything, he goes on to tell us what to do with our thoughts too. Look there in verse 8. Fix your thoughts on what is true, and honourable, and right, and pure, and lovely, and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. When we do that, it's quite amazing how little room there is for dark fears to grow so large. Thank you for dropping by. Let your friends know they are welcome to visit too. This has been another episode of Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey. Until next time, goodbye.